Call the meeting to order on July 11th at 6 p.m. First, we'll have the Assistant Town Administrator, Diane Morris, read the agenda.
Good evening. Tonight's board will vote to approve or amend the agenda as it is presented tonight. We will have a consent agenda, and under that will be the Town Administrator payroll warrant and a one-day liquor license. After that, we will have an open meeting law seminar that is being presented by Janelle Austin of KP Law. Then there will be a consideration of year-end transfers, and this will be jointly with the Advisory Committee, the Finance Director, the Town Accountant. We will also have a consideration of signing a bond anticipation note by the Treasurer Heidi Doyle. Sean Colleen, our DPW Director, will be here asking for possible approval of future road work. And then there will be a Select Board report, and then we'll go into executive session under Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 21A. Section 3, to discuss strategy with respect to threatened potential litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the town, and the chair so declares. The library. I'm going to ask the chair if you will consider moving the signing of the bond anticipation note to right after the end of the open meeting law seminar.
That's fine with me.
So I have one little change.
Okay.
I don't think that's a bond anticipation note. I think it's a grant anticipation note.
Grant? Okay.
So that's like a typo.
Okay.
Okay. With the revisions, do I have a motion to accept the agenda?
So move.
Second? Second. All in favor? Excellent. Did we have anybody sign up for public comment, Diane?
No, there was no sign of
Okay. Then we'll move on to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to accept the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Now we'll move on to the open meeting law seminar. We have Janelle Austin from KP Law. If you didn't get it on your way in, there's a packet that she had, and she wanted everyone to sign in as well if you're here for the open meeting law seminar. So I'll let her take it from here.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Janelle Austin. I'm an attorney at KP Law, and I regularly work with communities on open meeting law and public records issues. Tonight we're going to provide a brief overview of open meeting law requirements. Generally, I'm sure you're all familiar with the open meeting law. This is just really a chance to obtain a refresher, so to speak, and learn about some of the new requirements of the law as implemented by the Attorney General's office. We won't be dealing with any specific issues. This is really a best practices guide, so we won't be taking specific questions during this session, but obviously if any questions should arise, you can certainly reach out to the town administrator's office, and we'd be happy to deal with those as necessary. There are two handouts tonight. You have the slides. We're going to go through those in some detail, but it's also really a background guidance document for all of you. Can everyone hear me okay? No.
Janelle, is there a second handout besides this one?
We have only
here?
one.
There's this one.
Oh, maybe there is no.
Did you have this one?
Yes, there were two. Can you hear me better now?
Speak in the mic, please. Just put the mic that's up close.
Is that better? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. If I'm screaming, just let me know. There are two handouts. One is a PowerPoint slide, and that is the background document that we'll go over tonight in brief context, and then it can certainly serve as a resource guide to anyone if you have a specific question after this training tonight. There's also an open meeting law update that we did a couple of months ago regarding new cases that might be of interest to anyone, members of public bodies in particular, so we've given you that as well. We're not going to cover that in detail, but thought it would be helpful to bring this evening. So what is the open meeting law? The open meeting law is one of the so-called sunshine laws in Massachusetts. We have the open meeting law, which discusses how public bodies meet. We have the public records law that I'm sure you're all familiar with, and the conflict of interest law. We're really going to focus only on the open meeting law tonight. And what is the purpose of the law? The purpose of the law is to eliminate so-called secrecy surrounding deliberations and decisions of a public body unless a specific provision is met to meet in private in so-called executive session. An overview of some of the legal requirements that are of the most interest are certainly meeting notices and agendas. I'm sure you deal with those all the time. The meeting must be properly posted. It has to have the time of the meeting. It has to have the location of the meeting. And it has to have specific detail. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a couple of minutes. But basically, it has to provide adequate notice to members of the public to identify what the topics are so that if a member of the public wanted to attend the meeting, they would know what is being discussed. There's the minutes component of the open meeting law, and what does that require? The Attorney General's office, which implements the open meeting law, says that minutes need to be, of course, accurate, they need to be timely prepared, and they need to be approved by the public body. So that's something that all public body members are familiar with, but certainly there's been an increased emphasis of that over the past couple of years by the Attorney General's office. Verbatim transcripts of a meeting are certainly not required, but they need to essentially be significantly detailed or detailed enough so that members of the public are going to know what the public body discussed and what was the resolution or the motion or action taken by the public body at the meeting. There is specific guidance on approving those meetings that was recently clarified by the Attorney General's office, and we'll talk about that briefly. That change took place in 2017. So what is a meeting? A meeting is broadly defined as any deliberation amongst a quorum to discuss matters within the jurisdiction of a public body. So essentially, whenever a public body, the majority of the members of the public body are discussing something that they have authority or control over, that constitutes or could constitute a meeting. The meeting significantly does not include an on-site inspection of a project or a program as long as the members of the public body do not deliberate or discuss that at the site visit. A best practice may be if there is going to be some discussion during a particular site visit, that it's just posted to be cautious, that in case members of the public body want to discuss it, it doesn't implement or raise issues under the open meeting law. And you can always post a follow-up meeting. There can be an inspection that's done, and then a follow-up meeting is posted 48 hours in compliance with the open meeting law, and then it can be discussed so members of the public can attend that as well. The term meeting also doesn't include gatherings, and this question comes up a lot, of a quorum of a public body at a private or public gathering or a social event, a parade, a birthday party or retirement party. That certainly would not implicate the open meeting law. But you always want to avoid the appearance that there is discussion of municipal business or any public business within your body's jurisdiction as part of that process. The term meeting also doesn't include attendance and participation by a quorum of the body at a posted meeting of another public body. So if a majority of the planning board members wants to attend a conservation commission, it would not implicate that. However, if an individual or a member of that other body wants to speak, we recommend that they speak as an individual, or you can post the meeting as a joint meeting and have it at the same time, and that certainly, in my opinion, would cover you as well under the open meeting law. So what is deliberation? So the open meeting law doesn't cover everything. It covers if members of a public body are deliberating on a particular matter. And I've included the definition on page 4 of the slides, but it's a broad definition, as you can see. It's an oral or written communication through any medium, and we'll talk about that in further detail, including electronic mail between or among a quorum of a public body on any public business within its jurisdiction. So we're going to talk about email, text messages, social media in a little bit more detail, but just keep that definition in mind as we go along in the training a little bit. No members of a government, provided that no opinions of a governmental body are expressed, deliberation excludes certain things. So what does it exclude? It excludes scheduling things generally. A meeting agenda, procedural information, the meeting will start at 6 tonight, not 7 o'clock, or reports or documents that are just being provided by the chair to members of the public body, but no further communication is made. One trending topic in open meeting law determinations by the Division of Open Government of the Attorney General's office that governs enforcement of the open meeting law is email. And we all use email for all day, every day for a variety of things, but it's worth noting that email and social media are really something to be careful of in terms of triggering the requirements of the open meeting law. It's expressly addressed in the open meeting law, and what the Attorney General's office requires is that a quorum of a public body may not use email to share their ideas, feelings, opinions, beliefs, whether serially or in a single email. So member 1 sends an email to member 2, who then sends it to member 3, and by the end of that chain of email, the entire public body has discussed a particular topic. That could implicate the open meeting law. So what we recommend is always beware of replying to all on emails, and you really want to limit the use of emails to scheduling purposes to the extent that you can. And certainly the goal here is to have public business be conducted at a public meeting. You can always assume that email could be forwarded to unintended individuals or be CC'd, and so you always want to make sure you're using that in an appropriate manner. Social media is another particular topic that the Attorney General's office has recently focused on. That includes text messages, social media posts, so be conscious in terms of how if there are chain text messages or group text messages, that could also implicate the open meeting law as well. The next slide really just reiterates email and social media implications, but as I mentioned, an email, a voicemail, instant message, a posting or a blog, a web discussion group, or a chat room are all things that, in my experience, have implicated or potentially implicated the open meeting law. Any questions on that from the board? Just move ahead. Okay. So what is a public body? And this question comes up from time to time. Is a particular group or members of a governmental entity a public body? So I've included that definition here on the bottom of page 6, but it is a multi-member board, commission, committee, or subcommittee within the executive or legislative branch. It's very broadly construed. There are narrow exceptions to when the open meeting law wouldn't apply and when an entity is not a public body, but certainly the assumption from the Attorney General's office through her office's determinations are that most public bodies are in fact, or most committees are in fact public bodies. It also applies to subcommittees, and that question comes up from time to time. The Attorney General's office looks to 3 factors in determining if a group constitutes a subcommittee: if it's quote unquote within government, empowered to act collectively, and serving a public purpose. So clearly the public policy goal here is to be very transparent in what governmental entities do. Turning over to page 8 of the materials, one thing that often comes up in communities is where should meetings be scheduled. Certainly, public meetings should be at an accessible location, and that's a requirement of the open meeting law and the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the location of the meeting must be included on the notice. If for whatever reason there's a flood, there's a safety concern, the elevator's broken, and that meeting location needs to be changed, the notice should be updated and posted as soon as practicable. Practical considerations that sometimes come up is the ability to meet at a privately owned location. That comes up often, as you know, for the Conservation Commission if there's a site visit. So that might be one reason to conduct or have one member of the Conservation Commission conduct a site visit and then have deliberations back at Town Hall where it's an accessible location. Moving meetings to a different location, as I mentioned, and certainly we want to, though the doors are closed now because of air conditioning, closing doors during open sessions. We want to make sure that people know that they can certainly come into the meeting and that it's open. For meeting notices, this is a particular focus of the Attorney General's office, and we want to make sure that all public bodies post under the requirements of the open meeting law. There was a change when the law was There was an amendment when the law was changed a couple of years ago that now posting needs to occur 48 hours in advance of a meeting, but now it excludes Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays unless there's an emergency. So we had July 4th holiday last week, so that posting consideration would need to be taken into effect. So for a Monday meeting, notice has to be posted on Thursday, but if Monday's a holiday, a Tuesday meeting must be also posted on a Thursday. The notice must include both the date and time that the notice is posted, and that's something that's usually done, as you know, by a stamp. If it's revised, it has to include both of the times. So where does the notice have to be posted? It has to be filed with the town clerk and be visible to members of the public. So that's something I know the town does a great job with, and we want to make sure that best practice is continued. And certainly, I know you have a great website. It's also available on the town's website to members of the public as well. It has to include the date, time, and place, and the listing of topics that the chair reasonably anticipates will be discussed at the meeting. So anything that the chair thinks this is going to come up, it has to be sufficiently detailed so a resident or another member of the community can say, I would like to attend that meeting to talk about 123 Main Street. The notice has to include a list of topics. It doesn't need to be a long paragraph form list of everything. However, again, addresses need to be required. If there's a particular, a grant or a bond issue, that should be included. Regularly occurring items do need more detail. There was a recent determination on that than simply old or new business. Certainly, if something's not anticipated, that's a slightly different situation. But if we know, for instance, 123 Main Street is going to be discussed, or a particular liquor license is going to be discussed, or a property at issue is going to be discussed, we certainly want to make sure we include that to put members of the public on notice that might be an interest of coming. Another best practice or practical consideration to take into effect is not to use acronyms. I think anyone that does work in public service or government gets used to our various acronyms on a variety of topics. HUD, DEP, DCGIS, DHCD, a variety of different acronyms. So you want to spell it out if you can, just so members of the public know exactly what is being discussed at a particular meeting. For executive session, we want to cite to the specific reference and include as much information as we can on the notice without obviously tainting the town's position if it's something that can't be disclosed. But generally, you want to be as detailed as you can and avoid these shorthand references, so to speak, personnel, contract negotiations, real estate generally. If an executive session is planned and it's the only matter, we do recommend also including an open session, because the public body would open an open session and then enter into executive session. So that's an issue that does come up from time to time. Practical considerations, matters not reasonably anticipated by the chair must be added to the agenda to the extent feasible, and the updated agenda, as I mentioned, must show the date and time as well as a particular change to the agenda. Matters not reasonably anticipated may be discussed and acted upon by a public body, but if possible, the Attorney General's office recommends that the best practice is that it is put off to a later meeting and posted within that 48-hour window. Obviously, if there's a blizzard, an emergency, and we'll talk about what constitutes an emergency, that would be something that the board or public body could consider right out the bat. Some practical recommendations on emergencies, and these are tried and true examples. Comply with the law to the extent possible, but poor planning does not equal an emergency. So if it can be put off, it really should be put off. Natural disasters and public safety issues obviously qualify as an emergency. There's a particular grant that's due on a particular day. That could be an emergency. But obviously, you want to the public body wants to limit the deliberations just to that matter and not go into other particular topics. And then we recommend it be posted for the next available meeting. If it's an emergency, certainly there's a blizzard, there's a ice storm that happened. 2008 was the year of the horrible ice storms. There were emergency meetings all over the state. fine. Then it'd be reposted, members of the public can come, and the board's discussion takes place to ratify what happened at that prior meeting. That's an option as well. But really think about, is this an actual emergency, and would the Attorney General's office consider it an emergency? For recording meetings, unless it's readily apparent, such as this evening, we recommend that the chair must make a public statement if there's an audio recording. And that's, if an individual wants to, him or herself, record the meeting, you can, but you really should inform the chair that the meeting is being recorded, and the chair can make an announcement to everyone at the meeting so that they know they're being recorded by an individual. The chair can also position recording equipment so that it doesn't interfere with the public meeting, and to ensure that it's accessible to members of the public that may need accessibility accommodations. So conducting a meeting, and this is something that we'll talk about it, and it's addressed in one of the cases that I've provided you. There was a recent decision that came down in the Superior Court involving a school committee and when public comment should be conducted and the limitations of public comment. But generally what we recommend is, if public comment is done, it's done within a specific time frame, and while it's not specifically required by the open meeting law, and I've included that a determination there that deals with that, there are the chair has the authority to say, okay, we're going to hold the public comment at the beginning of the meeting, the end of the meeting, the middle of the meeting, but certainly we want to make sure that it protects individuals' rights, and that there's no debate, and that there are content neutral restrictions in terms of what people are speaking about, and that's to deal with First Amendment and free speech considerations. And that is addressed in the Corey Spalding versus School Committee case that I've included in the materials as well. Remote participation, I don't know if that's something that is regularly used, but certainly that's an option available under the open meeting law. It may be allowed for the select board and all boards and communities in the town, and I've included the specifics on that if that's something that your particular body would like to use on a more regular basis and how that's required. So let's talk about executive session, because this is probably the area that most of the questions come in on. How is an executive session conducted? What are the rights associated with that? And in the minutes relative to that as well. So how is an executive session conducted? First, of course, it has to be put on the agenda or the meeting notice in compliance with the open meeting law. And the public body, the chair, would convene the open session beforehand and state the purposes of the executive session that may be revealed without compromising what took place. So I'll give an example. If there's an enforcement case or a particular property that the town is considering taking enforcement action as a result of violations of a sanitary code, that may be something that the town doesn't feel comfortable at this point saying we aren't going to do. And so they might put enforcement case, but not list a particular name of an individual or not list the particular address, because it may affect or be detrimental to the town's litigating position. That's one area. So certainly it's a judgment call, but the best practice is to include as much information that can be included without serving or being detrimental to the town's position on that. There will be a roll call vote to enter into executive session and an announcement as to whether the public body will then reconvene in open session or end the meeting at the executive session. Certainly, if there are documents used or exhibits, then they would be attached or included with the executive session meeting minutes and maintained confidentially until the board or the public body ultimately decides they can be released. The public body only wants to discuss the matters that are cited on that meeting notice for the executive session when it is in executive session, and all votes should be taken by roll call. So that's a very specific requirement that the Attorney General's office strictly enforces, and a lot of the determinations deal with this particular issue. I've included, just for your reference, the common purposes to go into an executive session if you should need it, but certainly if there's ever a question as to can I go into an executive session for a particular purpose, or is it something that wouldn't fall within an executive session purpose, or how does the Attorney General's office look at that particular issue? Certainly you can reach out to the town administrator's office and they can consult with us as appropriate on that. Some practical considerations, as I mentioned, the executive session meeting notice item has to have as much specificity as possible. The related vote to enter executive session also has to have as much information as possible, and a declaration must be done by the chair to indicate why there is a purpose or a need to go into executive session. Any questions on that? So let's talk a little bit about meeting minutes, because that's something that often, it's a time-consuming process, it's required, and also there's always a lot of questions that come up about what needs to go in them, how are they maintained, and how are they released. So what needs to be in regular session meeting minutes? And this also applies, and I'll compare if there's differences between open session and executive session, I'll note that as well. But all meeting minutes, whether open session or executive session, need to have the date, the time, the place of the meeting, and all the members that were either present or absent for a particular meeting. It needs to have, and there's no standard in place by the Attorney General's office, but what they require is a detailed summary of a discussion of each topic, sufficient to allow any person not present at the meeting to understand the substance of what occurred. So I always use the example John Smith, and one time I was doing a training and there was a John Smith, so my apologies to John Smith, but John Smith isn't at the meeting. John Smith couldn't watch the video at home. John Smith wants to really know what happened after the open meeting law training tonight, and so essentially John Smith should be able to pick up these meeting minutes, 6 months from now and say, oh, this is what happened, and it should be detailed enough so that someone reads it and it's a version of what took place at the meeting. It will have to have a discussion of any decisions that were made, actions taken, and votes recorded, so no secret ballots are permitted, and a list of documents and other exhibits used by the body at the meeting will be part of the record but not the minutes. So you don't need to retype any document that was included, but certainly there should be a reference. If it's an important document, the best practice is to reference that document. That may be a plan, that may be a study, that may be a deed. So there's a variety of different documents that may be referenced. It will become part of the minute, it will be attached, it needs to be verbally identified, and the content of the document, if it's discussed by the members, it should be referenced in the minutes as well. The Attorney General's office, in their amendments to the open meeting law regulations in 2017, clarified what the time frame was for approval of minutes, and it's very clear now. They must be created and approved in a timely manner. The approval must occur generally within the next 3 meetings or within 30 days, whichever is later. So it's a pretty short time frame, particularly if you have a busy town meeting season and you're balancing other things, or you have a particularly contentious hearing and there's a lot of minutes that need to be done. So my advice is always, to the extent you can, try to stay on top of the minutes to really ensure that this deadline is met as much as possible. Minutes are public records as of the moment of their creation, regardless of whether they've been approved. And so what that means is the draft, if there's a draft and the minutes have not been approved, the draft is a public record subject to disclosure. But certainly the goal here is to create the minutes as quickly as possible and have the board, public body, approve the minutes as quickly as possible. And upon request, the minutes must be made within 10 days. One significant development, there was a determination a couple of years ago now that the Attorney General's office held that there can be no charge for meeting minutes. So separate and apart from a general public records request for meeting minutes, there can be no charge for that. There's a slight deviation for executive session minutes, and there's a summary here, but the purpose, executive session meeting minutes are reviewed on a regular basis to determine whether they can be released. However, they can be withheld from public disclosure until the purpose of the exemption no longer exists, or if they're otherwise protected under the public records law. So that would include personnel information, attorney-client privilege, or other materials. There may be a basis to withhold on that basis. And there's an approval process here where generally the public body would review them under Exemption 7, which is the open meeting law. To the extent that there's a complaint, there is an enforcement process that is considered by the Attorney General's office. There's a complaint filed with the public body and then a response by the public body within 14 business days, and the Attorney General's office would get notice of that. A public body would consider it at a properly posted meeting, either an open session or executive session as well. Enforcement, as I mentioned earlier, the Attorney General's office has a branch of her office, which is called the Division of Open Government, and there's attorneys there that conduct oversight over alleged open meeting law violations. They look at a variety of things, and they decide whether an open meeting law violation has in fact occurred, or whether the public body has remedied the violation or taken other steps. And so I've laid that out on this slide as well. I've outlined some of the recent changes just to highlight those because I think they are noteworthy. Again, the organizational effect of some of the substances in there, but they clarified some of the technical requirements in terms of the posting notices. One thing that has come up recently in many communities across the Commonwealth is what happens if the website is down and our notice is on the website, and the Attorney General's office says, well, if it's within the 48-hour posting period, you have to restore your website within 6 hours of the discovery that it's down. So a citizen calls and says, are you meeting? The website's down, there's nothing up. 6 hours of discovery, or you have to reschedule the meeting. So that's something just to keep in mind. That was a specific directive from the state on that issue. Any new member of a public body should receive open meeting law training, which certainly you're doing this evening, and there is a certification requirement, and I've mentioned the latest directive from the Attorney General's office on that, and that clarifies the certification process for open meeting law compliance. For filing a complaint, the Attorney General's office requests that you use the form that they provide in terms of filing a complaint against a public body. And like I mentioned earlier, I think the most significant change to the 2017 regulations is really the approval of meeting minutes. If there is good cause, and that does come up from time to time, there's a backlog of minutes, and so there are sometimes staffing issues. An individual, may not be able to prepare the minutes, or there may be, someone retires and someone else hasn't come on, and there is a good cause provision. But certainly the best practice is to approve the minutes as quickly as possible. The notable recent court decisions, and I've provided a lot more detail on those cases in the second handout, but I think in particular the first one is worth noting. That's the Corey Spalding case. And that addressed an allegation that school committee members were critical of or did not allow individuals to speak when they were critical of the committee, and that implicated free speech rights. So that's definitely worth reading in that update I've provided in more detail. There's a Swansea case as well, sufficiency that dealt with sufficiency of meeting notices, and the notice was sufficiently detailed. There's also a case involving Wayland, the Bolter case, that discusses employee evaluation process as well, and I've provided some additional detail on that. So I know that's a lot of information to take in, and I'm hopeful that the materials and the overview I've provided, I know you guys do a great job with this, and I know it's a lot of specifics. Division of Open Government has frequently asked questions on their website that are also really great if there's a particular topic. But if there's a particular area of a concern, you can always reach out to the town administrator's office. Thank you very much.
We have some time, so if anybody has, Carol, if you could come up to the microphone when we talk about that.
Do you know the record of violations, is that provided by the AG's office, by Doug?
I believe it is. The Division of Open Government has a website that lists all of the particular determinations for individual communities, so that is information that's readily available from their website.
So we can pull it from there. Thank
Yes,
you.
you're welcome.
Anyone else? Any questions? Go ahead, Jim.
If there are draft minutes that are corrected, like draft minutes say that we didn't approve a liquor license, but in fact we did and corrected, are those draft minutes still public records, or is it only once amended the final minutes?
The final minutes would be the public record, yes.
And then are there any guidelines on time limits for public comment? It looks like the Natick case, it would look like it was 0 minutes.
Right. So the Natick case was interesting because some individuals were granted longer to speak than other individuals, and so the allegation was that it wasn't a content-neutral speech restriction. Generally, in my experience, the best practice is to set a specific time frame either in total or per speaker so that it's content neutral. So 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. And that individual has that amount of time to speak. Certainly if the board has a full agenda for a particular evening, or a committee, or any public body has a particular reason why public comment can't take place, that, in my opinion, would be content neutral. But certainly, there's no specific criteria from the Attorney General's office at this point in terms of how to do that. And in fact, public comment is not required by the open meeting law, just that the meetings be open to the public.
Yeah, I could just imagine if we provided 30 seconds.
Yes.
Well,
It's
not
always-
required, that's,
It's always a little bit of a policy decision in terms of how that should be addressed, given what's on a particular agenda, if there's a particular public interest. I think the goal is to always have it be either in a manner so that individuals are obtaining equal access or equal rights to discuss their particular point of view.
Just got run into this actually in public contracts. Is there an actual specification what constitutes a legal holiday? We've had issues on soft holidays, things like days after Thanksgiving, Suffolk County holidays like Evacuation Day and stuff like that. Is there actually?
I believe, and I can confirm, but the last I checked this, I believe it's based on the state holiday list, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts list, but I can certainly confirm that.
We have, just as a clarification, in our town, I know when I was on advisory, the Friday, it's the hours of the town clerk's office, right? For posting, or?
I'm sorry.
The 48 hours posting of a meeting. I think that's part of where the legal holiday comes in, but if the town clerk's office is closed, it has to be 48 hours.
You'd have to accommodate back to provide it to the. So legally, under the open meeting law, it's 48 hours in advance, but certainly if there are particular limitations on hours for posting, that would have to be taken into consideration as well.
Right, because you want to make sure if they're not open on a Friday and there's a Monday holiday, you've got 48 hours of posting. Yeah. Go ahead,
Quick
Jeff.
question, Janelle. So one of the things we do, and I want to understand the word content-specific input, we typically, if we have a large audience and a lengthy discussion, suggest that no one make a point that's already been made. So we're sort of biased a little bit in content, but if someone's already made the same exact point, is it okay to limit it to people that are making a new point?
I think so. I mean, the Spalding decision, it was a Superior Court decision and never went up on appeal to the appeals court. It was ultimately settled for a monetary settlement prior to going up. But I think the goal in reading that decision, certainly under the open meeting law, the chair has control over the meeting, and so no public comment is required, and so there are restrictions that can be in place. since Spalding was decided back in November, one trend I've seen is a set amount of time, and then there be a request from the chair of the public body to say, we would ask that if the point's been made, you defer to another speaker. And certainly that's something that could be taken into consideration. If it's an area of particular public interest, I've also seen it be continued to the next meeting to allow additional input from members of the public as well for a set amount of time. And that's something that has, since this decision came out, it's, there's a flow over to the next meeting. But certainly, I think having a particular time, and people are generally courteous, and that can be done in that manner as well. But the chair ultimately has control over that meeting.
Can you come up to the mic just for for TV purposes? People are watching.
You can use mine too.
Lisa Kim from Board of Health, and I guess my question is, we often, with septic issues, obviously that can be a public safety concern if there's a failure, and so sometimes that's an expedited review that Mark and the board has to consider that we don't necessarily know about in advance and have to add things occasionally to the agenda. But I've also seen many requests come in to the board for, construction-related issues, things that aren't technically an emergency, but just like you said in your slide, like poor planning doesn't constitute an emergency. And we get a lot of pressure, to accommodate people, I'm going out of town, my engineer's here. And so it's actually the opposite, that we're getting a lot of pressure to add things to the agenda at the last minute, not, the week before when we'd like to post it and have that. So do you have any sort of suggestions about that?
Sure. So certainly on any Title V issues or any septic or failure, I do believe that the Attorney General's office would likely deem that an emergency, a public health emergency, similar to issues under the sanitary code. And I've had that come up a lot if there's an emergency condemnation or something along those lines. The poor planning, I think that would fall under potentially the poor planning, depending on the particular facts. Certainly would have to look at it, but if is there a particular rush to get something approved because of a public safety emergency? It's going to be a judgment call. If it's really just timing or vacation, I think it is likely the Attorney General's office would not deem that in an emergency. Certainly there's an ability to discuss it, but a risk, and then have it be posted for the next meeting with 48 hours in advance. But certainly best practice would be to put it on in my opinion, to put it on for the next meeting.
I think we agree, but I just wanted to get that on TV.
From the lawyer, yes.
Music to your ears.
Janelle, I just wanted to share one best practice thing that I try to do when I was on advisory before this, is to prevent the reply to all, which I think can get a lot of people in trouble with emails, is to if you're sending something to your board, BCC the rest of the board, so then they can't reply all.
And
that if you're sharing information, and then there's no chance of a deliberation through a reply to all if you BCC your other board members.
And you'll see in a lot of communities I work with, if a chair sends the agenda out, is there anything that anyone would like to add to the agenda? And then there's in bold at the bottom, in caps, please do not reply substantively to this email, or something along those lines. I think we're all so tech-centric these days that our natural inclination could be to do a reply all. But certainly we just want to ensure that there's no substantive discussion, no beliefs, opinions being shared over email. But certainly scheduling or logistics or sending out meeting notices or meeting materials, as long as there's not that ongoing chain or potential for a serial chain, is really that is a good best practice. Thank you.
Anyone else? Does anyone have any other questions or comments? No? Well, thank you, Janelle. And
Thank you
I
for
would
your
encourage
time.
Everybody else.
A lawyer getting an ovation.
I think they're applauding because it's before 7 o'clock. I would encourage everybody to have the rest of your board members watch the recording once Dover Sherborn Cable Television puts it on, so
And
everyone can see it. I think it's helpful for everyone to know this.
And I'm happy to also, I brought extra copies of the materials, but I'm happy to also send them electronically to the town administrator's office to distribution to anyone that can't be here as well. And thank you all for your time. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's an impressive turnout for the middle of July.
You said required.
We're still impressed, Lisa.
I want to give you a minute just to have, Heidi, we're going to have you next with the consideration of signing a grant anticipation.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah.
We'll give them some time to clear out.
Yeah, fine, no worries. You should take it, thank you. Anyone else here from the town? Awesome, thank you. Can I ask you something? All right, I'm Becky Morse, I'm the assistant town clerk.
Thank you, John.
Appreciate you. I think the round of applause means that reduce your bill by half. Well, then you can reduce it by 100%. Or double it.
Thank you, Janelle. Thank you. Take care. Thank you so much. Give me the stuff here, and I'll send it out to you.
All right, Heidi, you're up.
Good evening. Heidi Doyle, Town Treasurer. I'm here today on behalf of getting the Select Board to sign the state grant anticipation note for the library that was approved. It's for $726,720. We had a bid that was done yesterday, and we received 4 bids. The lowest one came in at 2.16%, so we're very happy to see those numbers. The grant could only be given till June 30th because it turns out the library contract only goes till June 30th. We're working on getting an extension or amendment for the next time when we need to, if we need to extend it. We may not need to extend it, but if we need to extend it, that is an option. It's already, the library has already talked with them. The library trustees have already been in touch,
So we need a motion.
Well, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
What was the name of the winning bidder?
It was Newburyport 5 Cents Savings Bank.
Thank you.
And I have a list of the bidders if anyone's interested in seeing. We received 4 bids.
Who are the other 3?
The other 3 were Oppenheimer and Company, Century Bank and Trust, and Unibank.
Thank you.
So we'll take a motion.
So I move that we approve the issuance of the grant anticipation note as proposed by the treasurer and approve the award to Newbury 5 cents.
Newburyport 5 Cents Savings Bank.
A long time ago. That was- Should we have the dollar amount in the motion?
Yes, the dollar amount is for $726,720.
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion? Not? All those in favor?
I'll start
Bring it up so
circulating.
you can sign.
Does anyone need a blue pen?
I've got it.
As long as it's one.
As long as it's only, you're only allowed to use a blue pen if it says check me first.
Okay, so the selection board are going to sign on the red, so you can start signing down that way.
Sean, advisory's not here yet, so if you want to jump in, we'll take you out of order.
Yeah, these are
Everybody wants to get out of here.
George, the night's turning out better and better for you.
Eric, that's black.
We only need one blue, so I agree. We're gonna go blue soon.
Okay.
All have check me?
Sorry.
I think those are all my blue pens that I gave to Chuck. Keep stealing them.
We've got checkmate
Just under the red. Just under the red dot.
Over here, you wanted me to sign, what's the last one?
Sorry.
This one?
It's, right here, so I'm in
Okay.
And then Carol or Jess.
Whatever. Send that.
Heidi, I can just give Diane a copy, because I have the copy for us.
I was very careful to sign John Hancock.
Oh, I see that.
John Smith probably lives at 123 Main Street.
Thanks for teeing this up. I mean, this was not a surprise, so.
The meeting schedule's August 1st and August 15th.
I think that's just the treasurer.
Is the red for us?
Payment management.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, girl.
Thank you.
Next to an open meeting law seminar, this is my next favorite thing.
Go ahead whenever you're
George
ready.
said I could have
5
5 minutes, so I'm gonna talk for 4.5 minutes, so I only have to take 30 seconds of questions.
I thought he said 3 hours.
That's next time. Let me get one more copy of this.
Hey, Sean, Paul has.
I had an early version of this, now I just need this back. So briefly, I brought this map just to show you, the intent is to go over next time the pavement management plan, which we've been working since May to develop. We hired Green International to come in and do an assessment of the roads, which they did partnering with a firm that basically takes a digital scan of the entire roadway system. I had intended to wait until we had that to move forward with anything that hasn't been approved yet. But we have the opportunity, still open, but the door's gonna shut really quick, to get some work done before, A, we're back in school, or it's too late in the year. We essentially haven't touched this fiscal year's Chapter 90 money. Hunting Lane, Nason Hill, and Elliott Street used up last year's. And we really don't need an assessment for some of the roads to know how bad they are.
I'm sorry, Sean, what, Hunting, Elliott, and what was the third that used up last year's?
Hunting Lane, Nason Hill, and Elliott.
Nason, thanks.
And, you know, 2 of those have been in process since last fall. We shimmed them last fall, then touched them up again, and I think most everyone here knows what happened. If you haven't driven down Elliott lately, that got done the 2nd of July.
So could you explain, as I'm looking at the map, is green means great and go, and red means bad and failing? Or-
Yeah, it might be small for you to read, but the color coding's in the bottom left.
He explains it here, Paul. It says road surfaces to be rated from level 1, excellent, to level 5. The third bullet on his.
And if you're looking closely, you'll notice that they actually scanned the roads just a few days before Nason Hill and Hunting got done. So you have to ignore those two, obviously. And Elliott
Yeah, it's brand new.
isn't showing brand new.
What's a level 5? Would that be like South Street through South Natick?
Yeah, if they kept scanning South Street off of ours, that would probably fall to a level 5.
Yeah, that would,
Which, just point of trivia, is actually a private way, and that's why it's never been approved by the municipality. It's not a public way.
it's like,
Didn't need it.
Yeah.
Really?
Yep.
So this is only public ways?
Yes, this is only public ways where Chapter 90 funds are eligible.
No, he's talking about South Street. He was just saying South Street.
And Natick.
Our South Street is a public
Yes.
way.
Sorry to confuse things, I just happen to know
Yeah.
that.
Natick's is not. Not sure why they never accepted it.
And there are all kinds of other little streets.
Those aren't streets, those are lot lines.
Yeah, you're looking at property lines.
Those are property lines?
Yes. All the streets are.
If you look at Bullard Street, there's only one line on the left leaving town.
There's one street that was missed. What's that guy's
That would be
called?
you and your neighbor. One street that's missed?
Yeah. You know, near where Forestry comes into Main Street. What's that little cul-de-sac called? That's a public way. I'm not sure of it.
Forest into Maine?
The little by Woodland,
Yeah, where's Mary live?
Grange Park?
Mary, oh, Cider Hill?
Yeah.
Oh, Cider Hill's not on here.
Cider Hills. Yeah, it didn't get graded. It did get scanned though.
And,
I saw it somewhere else.
Deerfield was missed.
There's a couple here that aren't showing up on this map. Again, they haven't finished doing their assessment, so they may not have actually tabulated the results yet. We're gonna go through this, I'm hoping August 1st, to go through the actual, plan, because the intent is it's gonna lay out the 5-year plan, so we can lay out going forward how much money we should be asking for outside of Chapter 90.
Snow Street turns bad right up my driveway.
but you're right about Deerfield. It's,
Yeah, it's probably just like I said. this old
I mean, the important takeaway is 80% of the roads are at 2 or 3. If you tweak that a little bit, that lays all the roads at level 3, which is in need of attention. Because when a level 3 hits to level 4, you've just increased your cost significantly.
And Sean summarizing the write-up when he's talking actually about Farm Road here. And you know, I deal with this in my job. And there's no question that when basically a road gets to a certain degree, you go from maintenance to basically complete reconstruction, and you more than quadruple the cost it takes to actually address the road. So saying and stop of it, I don't know what it is in this scale, I'm not used to this scale, is that maybe around a level 3, whatever it is, maybe 3 to 4. They basically have to do something at that point before it gets to a 5, which is complete reconstruction. And I mean, I say quadruple, I think that's even an underestimate. You know,
Yeah.
and, I've been outspoken advocate of what Sean did on Hunting and Goulding. Putting on that leveling course, putting a good crown on it, and putting that chip seal is incredibly cost effective. Probably can't be done on the main corridors, but certainly can be done on the back roads. And the big thing that kills any road, you drive around, look at Farm Road right now, look at anywhere where the sides of the roads are cracking. We don't have a real stormwater system here in Sherborn, so it's all country drainage. It's country drainage. It flows off the side of the roads, and they puddle and they pool. And when they're doing that on the actual pavement, the freeze thaw is what kills it. You look at any place where the road's deteriorating, it's the side of the roads, and it's where the puddles happen. And by putting on the leveling courses, which we haven't done a whole lot before, and actually putting a shape back to the road, that's what extends the life of a roadway. So whatever extra investment is done to give that shape is well worth it, in my opinion. I think that's what we're proposing for Farm Road.
One other point to Farm that isn't picked up in this. Since I've started, and I don't have the data in front of me because we don't always get it back from the insurance company, but I would estimate we've had more claims on Farm Road alone than all the rest of town, with people knocking tires and rims off of cars or busting axles completely, because the way it's breaking apart, where some of the grind patches are,
I know.
they're full depth. We went out and had to fill a couple just yesterday. Had to get the cops to help us because they were on some bad corners. They were ankle deep, a few of them, because the way the road's busting apart. So we'll plow the road up in the winter.
And I know that was before your time, but those select mills and fills that they did there work good in theory, but I just don't think the pavement's kept on.
Well, it needed a treatment after.
And I don't think the
guys-
game was hot enough. I think that's why I fell apart. It fell
Well,
apart in like a year.
Yeah, there's a couple things that happened, but even, everything works against you when you then leave it exposed. It should have got a quick chip seal after that.
How is the hot box working? Is it working better for repairs?
Yeah, it does work well. I mean, again, we're at a tipping point with the roads where it's very labor intensive to try and keep up with them when you start letting them go to the point where you think you're gonna go focus in one area and, you know, you're finding holes that are, you know, 10 inches deep
Right.
on another road. Some neighborhoods you can somewhat ignore because the people can get around them, but every bus, everyone headed to the region, there's a ton of traffic down like a farm road. And again, we have the opportunity to get it done in July, at least the shimming, which is a little bit, you know, it's a two-step process. They gotta basically pave over the bad. That takes a couple days. The chip seal, if anyone watched it, it's fast. It's quick. They're in and out in a day. That probably will get done during school, but it won't be as bad. They're gonna have to wait for the buses to get through and then they can start hitting it.
So I just read your handout here. And as I understand, you're proposing to do something with regard to Farm Road this year. And you've laid out at the bottom there two different,
I actually should have defined that a little bit better. The overlay we won't do. That's just a comparison if we didn't, I didn't explain that well.
so those
The
aren't
the
two
first
different-
item is, that's what I'm asking for. If we chose to not shim and chip seal, it'll fall apart so bad, we would, at the very least,
It would cost $200.
have to overlay from South Main all the way to Dover.
So your proposal is the first bullet, shimming and chip sealing,
Right, which is estimated at 158,000.
158,000.
No, and we're gonna use the chapter 90 money of 254.
Part of the 254.
Right, part of the 254 will pay for that 158.5.
Right,
And 241.5 inch overlay, is that including a mill or is that just straight overlay?
no. That would be, if, I don't want to do that, I'm not advocating
That-
that. That's just to buy the tonnage to do it.
So that's what we're not gonna, so if we waited.
That's what I do not wanna do.
You're saying if we waited, it would be 240, but if we do it this year, it's gonna be the 158.5.
I'm actually asking for a reason, so it doesn't include a mill? The 240?
Does not, no.
not include
It would be,
I'm asking for a
plus,
reason.
it'd be
So it-
plus another 40% probably.
Yeah, so it actually would be more expensive, because really, you really should not do overlays without the mills unless you don't have the depth in there. Dover did that, remember they did it on Farm Road, they did it all over town. They did it like 5 years ago, and it's already falling apart, because it doesn't have anything to grab onto. You have to do a mill when you do an overlay, I shouldn't say have to, but you really should to make use of it. You look at it, it's already peeling apart in Dover there, because when you don't have the utilities, it's not as important to do the mill, but then you have drainage issues, but again, it has nothing to grip onto the top course. So,
And-
what I'm saying is, it's gonna be probably 300,000.
Not 240.
I agree. It's not really a number I spend
You're
much time
looking-
putting together.
You're asking,
350, I mean.
you're asking us to approve the 158.5 tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah, one more question. So as I look at the map, I see Farm Road is a very long road. You're talking about doing the entire road?
South Main to the bridge, yes.
That sounds like a pretty good investment to me.
It's a very highly traveled road. Like you said, everybody going to the region.
Yeah.
I'm just curious about, like, something like, looks like Woodland Street. It looks like a long, is that Woodland? It looks like it's a long street and it's the same yellow as Farm Road.
Western.
Why did you pick one versus the other?
Again, what's not getting picked up is what me and Eric were just talking about, is the patches. The way Farm Road is falling apart right now, it really can't be ignored. It's peeling apart in 6-inch depths and very dangerous holes. We're gonna have trouble keeping up with it. And then there's other parts of the original road that are crumbling so hard, if they let go, we're liable to peel them up with a plow and have 40-foot sections of road in people's front yard.
Also, I assume Farm Road is more heavily traveled than Woodland. I mean, Woodland's not a side street, but Farm Road. Are you gonna, I mean, some of these things, this preliminary assessment, some streets where I walk my dog, Pleasant Street may be a level 5. And I think the abutters are happy with that. I think they like the traffic
Well,
calming. Wood Road, I walk on regularly. I'm surprised that it's at level 4. Is there any follow-up to do?
Yes, this is preliminary. They have not come out and spot checked.
Right.
This is the first time I pushed them to get something in front of you today, so I don't say I spent all this money and I have nothing, but I want to ask you ahead of it.
Right, okay.
Again, this isn't really teeing up this year's Chapter 90. I would have preferred to have this a month ago, but this is really teeing up this coming year's budget discussions, next year's Chapter 90, and 5 years out, because we need to start talking about how much we're going to spend, not the knee jerk of 400 extra 1 year and then not.
Well, this will leave 100 from this year's appropriation, and next year's will be 254, so you'll have 354
Right,
next summer.
and some of the 100 might get combined with several different grants to help us with the complete streets and some other projects that are in the works. If not, later in the year, we could just unload the 100 on a couple other streets if we want, if we have time.
So I'd move approval of your proposal to do Farm Road for the $158,500.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? Great. No, I like this, Sean. I think this is really helpful to lay it out like this, and I like to look at the map too.
I think we'll have the full purpose. By the way, this map, at some point, probably not before the August 1st meeting, but will be uploaded into our GIS. And what created this data is a snapshot every 10 feet of every road in town. So 55 miles broken into 10-foot sections. And
Well, then it'll get attached.
you will have access to that.
Then it'll get attached to our meeting minutes.
All 55 miles?
No,
The map.
All documents.
the documents.
Right.
Just quickly, when you do a shim, do you use a binder or top?
No, they're not using a binder because they can't lay the deck close
You
enough.
can't get the edges.
Because they're basically starting at 0 and climbing back up wherever it's low.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, thank you.
It's advisory. I assume you probably want to call your meeting to order before we get started on the year-end transfers. Yeah, we're done with everything else. The open meeting law training went faster than we expected, so we bumped Heidi and Sean up in front of you guys, and so.
So, I guess, let's call this meeting of advisory to order at 7:11 PM. Sorry, it's gonna take a moment here to go through our agenda real quick. The primary point of our agenda is to go over the reserve fund transfer that we need to go over.
And so I figured we'd have Sharon present what she's proposing, if that worked for you guys,
It does for us, yes. Any comment to that?
and then we'll ask questions from there.
As far as the agenda goes, there is one ad hoc addition to the agenda that was unanticipated when the agenda was posted. I've asked my select board members, former member of the advisory, Mr. Waldron, to give an update on the publicly available information regarding the library project. So that's the update to the agenda that I have for us.
Any of that after we do the.
Any other items that we should add on to the agenda? As far as the roll call, we're all here. All right, good.
Just on that subject, before you start, there were all these postings on Nextdoor Sherborn as to what's happening with the library project. It looks like there's a lot of people who don't know what's going on. So the idea of some kind of update, I hope, this is some of
They
those.
talked about it later. They've talked about having a FAQ update. The library trustees have talked about that. And they're meeting next Tuesday night. Is the next library trustees meeting.
Well, I hope somebody not only makes a presentation tonight, hopefully, but also that somebody actually posts something on Nextdoor Sherborn based on either the presentation tonight or the presentation next week.
Yeah, we'll discuss it at the trustees meeting. Would be the next, because they have a communications group that takes care of that stuff.
There's nothing on the agenda about an open session for the library, so I think it'd be inappropriate to kind of have a presentation tonight, but certainly is an executive session on that, and we can certainly discuss within that scope. And like like I said, like Jeff said, next week there's actually some open meetings with the library trustees next week and the building
It's
committee.
Tuesday, no, yeah, that's right, there's a half-hour special LBC meeting also because they didn't have a forum last time.
Alright. So let's get to the year-end transfers and
Okay, so everybody has a summary.
you put the microphone closer so they can hear you.
Okay, sure. All right, so everybody has a summary of what happened this year. And if you look, the column that is red, it says transfer to departments in deficit. This lists the departments in the town that exceeded their budget. So, and the amount that they exceeded it by. So in total, we had $290,127.86 in departments that exceeded their budget. We have on the other side, and with the green, these are the departments that are going to actually fund the shortfalls. At the bottom, you can see the reserve fund. The balance is still $151,946. And the net turnbacks after all these transfers is $166,540, which is, reasonable.
Sure.
Yes.
Question.
Sure.
So, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. If you want to, go ahead, Susan, if you want to.
So there were turnbacks of
Yes.
290 plus. So plus.
No.
Oh, turnbacks are 166
Turnbacks are
plus.
166, that's it.
Which includes the 151 of
Yes, it does.
reserve fund.
It
So there
includes
was,
reserve
so they
fund.
had there were, the way I'm reading this is,
Okay.
departments under budget were 290 plus about 15,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was about 305,000 of budgets that were under budget.
Yes, yep,
So if I could, my question,
I have a few, yeah, go ahead.
okay.
because I'm a lawyer, the thing I looked at was town council. And I
Okay,
saw a $129,000 transfer at year end. So my first question was, didn't we already make transfers? We originally started off with 85. We added nothing to
we
that?
added, we didn't do any reserve fund transfers throughout the year for that.
So legal.
Okay. The second thing would be, isn't a significant part of what the board spent or the town spent on legal fees related to the library project?
Yes, it is, I have an exact number if you.
What's the exact number?
The exact number is $76,654.66.
Why haven't we been paying that out of the library appropriation? Why is this coming out of the general fund?
This is the guidance that I've received, and this is what we did last year as well.
My concern is, at this point, just speaking as a lawyer, I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to recover a fair amount later in the process. I don't want to get into executive session discussions, but just from an accounting point of view, I would prefer to see all the library expenses in one place rather than spread out over different things. And number two, as a lawyer, I kind of object to not paying lawyers for accumulating this amount of money. This must have gone back quite a ways. I feel they should have been paid on a current basis.
No, this is all paid. They're all paid. This is all paid.
Just out of the accounts.
Did you deficit spend in the legal budget, is that what?
Yes,
Okay.
we did.
So they've been paying the bills along the way.
Oh, so this is just a deficit number?
Yes.
Yes.
And I assume the CM&D number is probably snow removal too, right? Is it part of that?
Yeah, some of it
Yes,
is.
yep.
That's what I, because those were the two biggest
Above
numbers,
and
and I know
beyond,
those are
yes.
the ones that we deficit spend.
Right, we budget 80,000 knowing it's not gonna be
Yes,
80,000.
yes.
So I agree with Paul. I think we maybe need to spend a little more time with legal. I think the library construction budget does have a line item for legal fees.
Okay. I can
So
reclassify it.
it probably should, and then it gets bonded or is part of our
Yeah.
cost. Now, we have the one, it's not all KP. Remember, the select board really approved that Chris Petrino firm from
Right.
Framingham, which is a separate fee, and I believe that was $40,000.
That's included in the 70,000.
So-
We went through every invoice that we received.
Technically, that wasn't approved by the library trustees, although they were here. That was, sort of, it was requesting a second opinion on behalf of the select board.
But it was all for the purpose of building the library.
I understand. I think it should still be part of the library, but I'm just clarifying that it's not KP law, it's not really town council, it's an added council that we added.
No, it's Petrini and Associates.
Yes.
Correct,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's
It's still
included in
legal.
That's included.
That is
in
included
now,
in
so
my total.
part of this is, 40,000 of that amount, or some, what did you say the number was for,
74, oh, 40.
Petrini was.
Petrini was a
I'm
fixed
clarifying that
fee, I
it's
think it was, is it 25?
It
Maybe 30.
was,
Yeah.
Included in that amount.
we have, let's see, about 25, yeah.
Yeah,
So I-
it was a fixed
Yeah.
fee at 25.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember
So
25
far.
or 30, but.
So my proposal would be to divide the legal fees into two numbers. One is the library number, and the rest is other.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
take the other out of the general fund, and the library piece put into and pay for out of the library construction costs.
I can do that.
Just, if I may, just one question about that. So if we categorize this, my understanding properly, like you, as a library expense, if and when we recover any funds, would therefore that money go to a library fund? Or, because we would want those funds to go back to a general fund for the town, right? Again, any fees recovered,
I want it to go against the borrowing that we've just authorized.
agreed, which the town does, not the library does. So therefore, any funds coming back in, you would want to have those funds come into the town's general fund, not directly to any sort of library sub-account. Does that make sense? I just want to make sure that the town general fund, again, if and when we were to recover any fees, I want to make sure those funds come back into the town's general fund and not to the library.
Now, that's a characterization decision to be made when the funds are received. I don't think we need to make it.
Hold up, Sean, do you have something to
It's
add?
gonna offset the debt against the band.
Right.
That was why some of it won't come off a band and get bonded until
Right.
perhaps those settlements are done.
Right, when we approved the approximately 2 million of borrowing at our last meeting, that was all gonna stay
It's all
short term,
banned.
and hopefully that money, any money we recover would go towards that. Rather, we won't long-term bond that entire 2 million, because whatever we recover would reduce that amount.
And again, so I agree with that. And my only concern is by categorizing this as a library expense, I just want to make sure if and when any funds are received back in, those funds go to the town general
the
fund
town
for
can
general.
allocate it, yeah.
That the
Yeah,
town
we
can
would
pay it.
allocate it towards that debt, I would
And that is
imagine.
not at the
But
discretion
I
of the
agree that
library.
the 74,000 should be a construction cost, not a operating cost.
Yes, it's a one-time expense, it's not a regular legal service type of thing. But number two, again, speaking like a lawyer, it would just be so nice to be able to hand a judge a document rather than a financial report that picks out 10 cents out of this account, 50 cents out of this account, and has a nightmare for some judge to figure out what exactly was spent on the project,
Or an arbitrator.
or an arbitrator.
Likely a mitigator. I would know.
Yeah.
And then finally, the accountability to the voters is much clearer. If we can say, here's how much this cost us. All the funds that we spent on this project are in one place, rather than having it in a way that even voters would have to do a lot of calculations to try and figure out what really were the costs. But having sat through a lot of meetings, I know the legal fees were necessary. I know they have helped the project. I know that the money has been accomplishing what we wanted to accomplish. They're all related to the library project. I guess my only, not complaint, but comment would be that I didn't feel like I knew that we were accumulating this volume of legal fees all at once. But maybe I should have asked more questions and pursued that a little more. I'm just kind of surprised at the end of the year I find almost.
We've asked a couple, I think Sharon's given us an update along the way where we found legal.
That's why I said some of this maybe just my part in not following it.
Yeah, So we were expecting a pretty healthy number in this
Yeah.
area too, yes. We've been keeping that up.
But it would have been nice to have a specific alert. you
It
know,
will
alert.
also include other fees if we hire some expert witnesses also.
Yeah, all those fees should be part of the library project.
Okay.
And certainly the 25 we discussed very specifically, the Petrina, the second opinion piece by,
I have another question not related to legal. Last meeting, the fire chief was here asking for the reserve fund transfer. That's this 15,000.
It is. You're right.
I just wanted to clarify that he's
Yeah.
not asking
No.
for that anymore because it's included in
Yeah,
here.
we didn't vote on it, yeah.
That was his.
right, we didn't vote on it because we wanted to see all the reserve funds.
Right, exactly.
In total, so that's, and that is the amount he was talking about last time,
Yes,
wasn't
it
it?
is.
Yeah.
It's pretty
I remember it was under
Software or
16,
scuba
yeah.
What's that?
It's either it's like software program or scuba stuff or
Repair,
something.
and it was,
The ladder repairs, repair.
It was the ladder repair was most of it, right, Sean?
Oh, that's news.
Yeah,
Chest?
right.
It was the ladder repair.
Yeah.
Ladder repair and then also
And funding of positions
salary
of the
for
grant
the
payment.
Oh, yeah.
fire captain too, that will eventually be reimbursed, yeah.
And just a final comment that because the library hasn't been open and they were able to make some savings, that the source of funds is this $84,000 from the library.
Yes, yes, they,
That's from their operating.
yes,
budget.
that's from their
Yes.
operating budget, but they didn't spend, and so that's gonna go fund,
Right, but
yeah.
there was additional staffing anticipating the library being
Yeah.
open, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
this was just to praise and commend
Yeah,
the library
And we
trustees.
did factor that into our budgeting process as well, looking forward.
We did,
Yeah.
yeah. She
We
committed
have a
to-
partial year for next year, correct? Is that?
Yes, we have
We
a
did.
partial year officially.
Yeah.
Me personally, I'm going short of that number.
I think
I think half, yes.
so.
We've been talking about, do you guys have anything?
I had a quick question on the police $50,000 turn back. Is that salaries or what's the police?
Let's see here. It's, yeah, it's salaries.
That's because
Was there
we're
overtime
short-handed.
number lower or something? Was their overtime number lower or something?
Yeah, actually, their overtime, well, it was pretty close, actually, but they've had some turnover,
Yeah.
so it's the regular compensation.
Well, and some of the overtime is
Yeah.
in the CM&D budget as well.
Well, and I think hopefully there'll be some clarification with the chief before we make the budget for next year, because I know I've talked to Steve about him and I meeting with him to talk about staffing levels to try to reduce that overtime number and see, I know he's had, I think, a consultant looking at
Yes, they
what the
had
right
a
staffing level would
We're
be.
still waiting on that report, as far as
Right.
I'm aware.
Yeah.
So,
Just getting ready to sign that contract with that consultant.
Oh, really? Oh, okay, so they haven't even started that
We went out
process?
to bid, just came in.
Okay.
We're working on the contract.
Okay, so that, the turnbacks then, that bumps up to 243,000, so that's,
Okay, but if I made a motion that didn't include the 76, it would be something like 229.
that's what you just said.
yeah.
Because the turnbacks go up to
243,
243,000.
yeah.
I don't understand that.
No, you're looking at the number up here, Paul. We're looking at the turnback number down at the bottom, the 166. You're gonna add the 74,000 to that.
Yes, but I'm looking at what is the amount being transferred.
Oh, the transfer amount.
And I'm saying it's,
Yep.
yeah, it's 224, I think, or 214.
Yeah,
Is it
14-ish, 14-ish.
Yeah.
213, 473.
I'll say 213 and change, right?
473.
So that's what the motion would be, to transfer budgets.
Second.
Diane's got the number.
I do have a question. Okay, go ahead. And not to beat it up again, because I think every one of us is in support of actually charging legal fees, obviously, to the library budget. To what extent can we go back and look at ones that have not been charged to the library budget and either reverse that or at least change the code such that they fall within that? Do you know what I mean?
Prior to.
Yeah, 'cause it sounds like
Of the
it sounds like
85 that was budgeted,
Oh, right.
some of it's probably been spent on the library project.
it has.
80.
Or was
Yeah,
the, wait, let's ask Sharon actually, is the 74 all inclusive of the 85 plus this 129 or
76.
76?
The 76 is when we look at all of our legal fees that we incurred this fiscal year, that is what is related.
So it would be like, so it's
specifically
about
to the library.
215,000 of legal fees in total.
210.
Or 210, you're saying 74 of that.
Yes.
I also meant prior year. I meant prior year.
Yeah, I mean-
This is something that's gonna be, I agree with what every single person on
Okay.
this board has said.
Well,
And,
Diane, what were you talking about, what was that other?
You just want to
fee?
make sure it's easy to recover.
Yeah.
And identify it.
Makes sense.
We didn't include the builder's
Builder's
risk
risk
insurance that we have to
insurance.
pay.
There's other things we can
There are
look at,
other things
and
that
and
we
like
can
you were
look at.
saying,
So
having
maybe
it
you can
all
go,
in place.
maybe you can go through and.
Yeah, we'll do that, Diane and I.
Everything
can go
library
through.
related.
That's a good
We
idea.
should
A couple
probably
other
look at
items.
with the prior fiscal year too, because we have a lot of legal fees from that.
Right.
Yes.
Probably the same amount of money, the 76,000, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think that's Eric's point, is he wants
And
to,
then, so builder's risk insurance that we paid this year, would you like, I mean, I'll figure that out and I can email you, and then we could, charge that to the library and then reduce.
what's the builder's risk, do you remember, is it 35? No, it's,
It's 20, the first year was 29,000, then we redid it again.
It was a
for
little
another
higher.
6 months. Then we redid it again for another 6 months.
Definitely adds up.
So, well, probably around $50,000, probably 60.
Yeah, had it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, I'll pull that up, and then Diane and I will go back to the previous fiscal year.
But we need to have a motion and a approval tonight though, right? Because you have to have this approved by the 15th.
Yes, I do.
I don't think we can go back and redo prior years.
Yeah, that's gonna have to be different. We won't- we won't
This is
do
what
that.
I'm saying,
This is
the
just
builder's
current.
risk in
But the
this one,
builder's
that's-
risk, I
Yes.
can go find that out and then just shoot you an email.
No, we need to make a
Because
motion.
we have to have a
Oh,
motion and approval
okay.
tonight by both boards.
Diane can go look right now.
I have another question that, for us on advisory, we have a small budget amount of something like $400 or $500. I never knew what that was for. And it turns out it's for paying someone to take minutes at the annual town meeting. And my understanding is we didn't have someone take those minutes this year, so I'm wondering, can that $500 be turned back?
Absolutely.
It's not my beer slush fund.
Yeah, but in total, guess what? In total,
can you just pick up a
in total, you
collection?
guys overspent your budget by
Because you
$500
have,
in
you
total.
have printing,
We did?
you have printing expenses.
Printing
Yeah.
expenses that, so
Okay.
you have you're over by.
You guys all write so much, the more pages that.
Prolific.
So if it were on the side.
Okay.
we didn't include any bar bills in there either, so.
All right, so Diane's gonna go find out what the exact amount of builder's risk, and we'll move that.
Okay.
And that was in the selectmen.
Are there any other questions on these budgets before, and we'll have the final number once Diane comes back.
Yeah, I have a question, just to make sure that I'm understanding this fully. So total legal spend last year was about 210. About 70 is going to get reallocated to the library. 76. So that leaves, roughly 130 that was spent. Budget was 85. What's the remainder? About 50K over
Oh, that we
budget.
that we overspent.
That's typically
And it
what
is
we
typical.
spend.
We typically spend about 130.
We usually leave the budget at the
80.
80 every year. It's one
That's
that
one
we
of those
know
line
we're
items
gonna
that we can
overspend.
overspend it and pay it
Yeah.
later without any sort of like, not
And we've
penalty.
talked about leaving it at that level, but that's, I think, the retainer we have with our law firm, and we like to leave it at that amount.
Kind of standard operating procedure.
Well,
We don't want them to have their slush fund.
Well, so there's two questions. Number one, does that represent a deviation from standard operating procedure? Which, no, it sounds like it doesn't. Second, I don't think we need to dive into the particulars of what that was spent on, if that's what we typically spend.
I think a lot of it's like contract negotiations, and, I mean, it's just the typical legal fees of the town.
Collective bargaining, did some
Oh.
collective bargaining.
There's a big labor and employment piece of it.
Yeah.
Do you want the builder's risk now?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
24,771. That's gonna go March of 19 to March of 20.
Right, but we paid it in.
It's paid.
We paid it in this fiscal year.
Yeah.
All right, so that brings it down to 188,702.
188, what was it?
188,702.
702.
I'm sorry, what did the 24,771 represent?
Builder's risk
Builder's risk
insurance.
insurance from March to March.
March 19th to March 20.
God, I thought it was higher than that.
That's another year.
Is that what you have, Diane?
I paid that.
If that was a 6-month policy, 6 months from March is...
No, was it 12?
It's a year,
That's a year.
March to March.
Okay,
Someone said we did a 6-month policy.
Oh, he said March to March.
Hold on, let's just confirm, because
yeah,
Diane's...
this is 18.
Is that,
Okay,
is that number?
so back in, excuse me, July of 2018, we paid the $12,250 for the extension.
How much did you say, Diane?
$12,250.
That's a 6 months extension, right?
Yes.
That goes to March, not March.
That goes to March.
And then April 3rd of 2019, I paid them $18,597.
So total, that's a little over 30,000.
So what, so it's 18,597, what was the other one?
12,250.
12,250.
Okay.
So just under 31.
It's different than,
So it's 30,847.
So that brings it to 182,626.86.
Okay. So from our board, I'll take a motion to transfer from the budgets listed $182,626.86 to the departments that are in deficit.
And just for discussion and clarification, we're backing out of that the $76,654.56 legal fees for the library project, the builder's risk insurance, and
30,847.
Yep.
30,847, and
That's it.
And those are going to be
That's it.
allocated to
To the
the
library.
library
Yeah.
construction fund.
Yeah.
Yeah.
George, I'm sorry, what was that exact number again? 'Cause we already did
The transfer amount is $182,626.86.
Thank you.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Our turn. Can I get a motion to make the similar transfer that George noted of $182,626.86?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
And all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon, for that. It makes it easy when you put these charts together. And also for the...
This was Paul's idea from last year.
Well, the communication also leading up to it, we kind of knew where we were going to be with your emails that you've been sending, which is great.
So if you could send me alerts on legal fees going forward,
Oh, okay.
on some
I can
like quarterly.
send them on a monthly basis, if you use it.
That'd be
I
good.
can certainly do that.
It's just, this is a lot of legal, more than I
I
thought
can
it was
send
going
them,
to.
I can send the debt page every month.
All right, I have one other item on the select board reports quickly. I was contacted by Kate Potter from the Regional School Committee. They're setting up the teacher contract negotiations again. She contacted, because we have a member of the Sherborn Select Board will sit on that negotiating team. I would volunteer to do it as a member of, when I was on advisory, I was a liaison to the schools.
Right, you say you did this in a prior life, right?
So moved.
So,
Before you change it,
Quick, get them locked in.
You're gonna volunteer. Quick.
Plus, you still have kids in school, which is another attribute, I would say.
After there should be no discussion.
So I just wanted
Share with your wife.
to, pass that by the board.
absolutely.
Great idea.
So moved.
Second.
So-
All right, all those in favor?
Just one comment that.
Yes.
That health insurance issues have to be the same both at the school. All town employees have to be on the same plans. So to the extent that there's any effort afoot anywhere to make any changes to any insurance plans or other benefits, they need to be coordinated with us and with Dover.
But the Sherborn school plan is different than the regional school plan. Regional and Dover plans are with they're still with, what's it called,
Suburban.
Suburban.
Yeah.
What's the Suburban?
We're with-
And
This isn't
right.
gonna involve.
I'm not sure, no, I think, no, sure, well, the contract negotiations do, yes.
They do involve the Sherborn schools.
Yes, the teacher contracts are for all 3 school districts.
So there may be health insurance
If,
implications.
right.
So we don't wanna get stuck with something different there than what we have here.
Yep. I think the health insurance is a separate issue that has to stay. I'll keep that in mind when we're. Okay. Any other selectmen reports? If not, I know.
I thought Jeff was gonna say something.
On the library?
Yeah.
We're gonna do that in executive.
In executive session.
Oh.
Because we don't wanna. So, I will take, did you have the?
I have it.
You have it? I have to read, sorry.
So can you
It's in your packet.
give us 5 minutes?
Thank you.
You want to go like into the kitchen or something?
Yeah, you can do that too, it's fine with me. Hang on, I got it, right. Did you find it?
I got it, yeah, I got it. I'll have it. MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A, Subsection 3, to discuss strategy with respect to threatened potential litigation. If an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigation position of the town, and the chair so declares, library, I do declare, the select board will not return to public session. I need a second and a roll call vote. Second by Mr. Yan. Having a second, we will now have a roll call vote. Mr. Durensis?
Aye.
Mr. Yan? Mr. Waldron?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Had to do it.
Yeah.
Mr. Morrow, aye. Having passed by a vote of 5-0, the open session is now closed, and we will not be returning to open session. We are now in executive session.